So this is going to be a video where I talk about my experience as an Australian living in the UK. Now, I went there in June of 2022 and I didn't get back to Australia until November 2023. I had 2 birthdays over there, so I was over there for a little bit longer than a year. So anyway, my experience with the UK was that it was basically a parallel universe of Australia where everything, by every possible metric or anything you could think of, is just a little bit worse, at least a little bit worse, if not a lot worse. And the first thing I want to talk about with that is wages. Now, when people come over to Australia, it doesn't matter where they're from, whether they're from Europe, the UK, Latin America, whatever, they always talk about, oh my God, this country, Australia, is so expensive. And yes, that's true, but we have very high wages as well. So while I was expecting wages in the UK to be lower than Australia, I wasn't expecting the prices to still be so high. I thought that those lower wages would be reflected in the price of goods and services. That was not the case. So to get quite specific about that, the minimum wage at the time where I was living in Scotland, I was living in Glasgow, and the minimum wage at the time was £9.50 an hour. So that's something like $17 or something along those lines. They've recently had a big boost. I think it's now 12 or 13 pounds an hour. And while that may look similar to the Australian wage or minimum wage on paper, because Australia's minimum wage I think is like $24 an hour or something like that. And it looks similar on paper, but we get casual loading in Australia. You get penalty rates, you get all that sort of shit. So if you're a casual, you get an extra 25%. So basically any casual job you're working, you're earning $30 an hour. So a really good example of this is I was working in a resort and I was washing dishes, and my base rate was $30 an hour, and then for the Easter holidays, for that public holiday period, it was times 2. So it was a different award to like restaurants and stuff in this resort. So I was making $60 an hour, and I worked a very long day. It was like 15 or 16 hours or something like that to capitalize on this, and I made almost $1,000 in a day. And that is just a crazy amount of money for unskilled labor, despite being a long day. $1,000 in a day, that's a shitload of money. And opportunities like that in the UK just don't exist. You work really hard and you slog along, but at the end of the day, you don't have any money to show for that. So I was working in kitchens in the UK and I would work a long shift on a Sunday. And after, if I'd worked 14 hours, I'd get paid £140, so like $270 or something like that. So that's a major difference, is the wages. And you don't get any leeway with the cost of goods and services, with the cost of rent. My rent, I was splitting with my partner, but it was £600 a month. And then you have to pay your own rates, your own council tax over there. So that was like an extra £50 a month or something like that. So I'm really not paying any more money 2 years later in Melbourne than I was when I was in the UK. And in the UK, my salary, when I started working in recruitment, I was working in healthcare recruitment for maybe like 6 months or something before I left. My boss is a really nice dude, and he paid me, quite frankly, a lot more than I deserved or he needed to. And he paid me £26,000 a year. Oh, that was pretty good. I'm pretty chuffed with that. I've never done Frisbee. He paid me £26,000 a year. And I think minimum wage at the time was like 19 grand a year. So he paid me well above what I was worth. But £26,000 a year is just so it's just such a low salary, The one thing in the UK that is cheaper than Australia, by a long shot, and it's a bit of an outlier, is groceries. I spend like £40 a week on groceries, and in Australia I'm spending like upwards of $100. So groceries in the UK are certainly a lot cheaper than Australia, but that's really the only thing I can think of. Another good example is public transport. So in Melbourne, for like a Mikey ticket, you pay I think $5 for a one-way ticket, and then it caps out at like 10 or 10.60. Like if you do 2 ways, you can go around all day for $10. Whereas in Glasgow, where I was living, a ticket for a bus, not that deep, a ticket for a bus was like £2.85. So, and there's no maximum threshold, and all the ticketing systems are different. So if you want to take the subway and then the bus and then a train, it's all different ticketing systems. So you might end up spending like £15 in a day just on maybe more, who knows, on public transport. But think about this, like your bus ticket one way is £2.85 and you're earning $9.50 an hour. So that's like a third of your hourly wage. Whereas in Australia, you're earning $30 an hour and your ticket's only $5, so it's like 1/6. And there's just so many examples of this where it's like, fucking, how much do you want me to pay for that? Coffee is a really good example. Like, I just feel like there's so many things in the UK where it's the same price as in Australia, except it's got a pound sign instead of a dollar sign. So if something's $5 in Australia, it's £5 in the UK. There just seems to be a million little things like that. And not only is the public transport very expensive, it's been privatized and it's a publicly listed company, so they're accountable to their shareholders to provide the lowest possible service for the highest possible price. So the buses are always late, or there's like phantom buses. There's a really common phenomenon where like you can trace it on the app. This is First Bus. You trace it on the app and then it just doesn't turn up. The public transport situation there is just such a head fuck. Even when I was living in Glasgow, I was like, oh, this is great, I'll go to Edinburgh all the time. And to get to Edinburgh one way was £10. It's a 1 hour train ride. £10 there and £10 back. And it's like, do I want to spend 40 Australian dollars just on the train fare to go an hour and back? Like, not really, dude. So I didn't go a lot of the time. And something else I was really looking forward to was going to Europe, you know, because you can get cheap flights and they're only 2 or 3 hours away, and then you can be in Europe. And I thought, oh, fantastic, I can't wait to do that. It takes me a whole day to get there from Australia. I can go there for weekend trips, but I never had any money to go. I never had any money. That's one of the awesome things about the UK is its position. You know, it's next to Western Europe and it's not that far to, like, even Turkey's only like 5 hours, but you never get to go because you never have any fucking money because you're constantly being squeezed dry. The UK just, to me, really feels like it's holding you down a lot more than Australia. Like, even if you've got no skills and you're living in Australia, if you want to work really hard, you can make a lot of money. Like, you can go make sandwiches in a kitchen in the mines, and like, if you put the work in, you can be on 6 figures with absolutely no skills whatsoever. And again, that sort of opportunity just doesn't exist. Well, that opportunity is there. Like, you can go do that in the UK, but you're not going to have anything to show for it in terms of money afterwards. You're just going to be working your ass off. So I always thought that working full time was the opposite of being broke. And very naively, I didn't assume that those two things could coexist, because what I tend to do is I work and then I stop and go have some fun. And so I would work, but then I would also not have any money. And it's like, well, what is the point of working? I couldn't wrap my head around it. What else? Got a bit of a list here for your viewing pleasure. Yeah, people in the UK tend to bang on about how good the NHS is. Like, you never pay for like seeing any doctors there or anything like that, which is fantastic. It's not true if you're coming over on like a holiday visa. I think I had to spend like £500 or something like that on health insurance for the 2-year visa, but like for a citizen it's totally free. But it takes like a month to get an appointment, and then you can only see the doctor for 5 minutes, you know. I think in Australia it's like 10 or 15 minutes, but in the UK you are just so rushed out the door. And on top of that, you don't get to like choose a doctor. Like, if you register at one place and he's a dickhead or she's a dickhead, then you're shit out of luck, you know. So basically how it works is it's based off your postcode there. So you only get allocated one practice, and you just have to like hope you get a good doctor. Basically, if the guy turns out to be an asshole, then that's your problem. You can't just go register somewhere else. So there are still, it's a real shame what's happened with healthcare in Australia, where doctors are, I remember even just like 10 years ago, like you could get a bulk billing doctor, like really good ones, like, and it wasn't a problem at all. And now it's just getting so hard. So, I mean, it is nice that it's free in the UK, but the quality is just not there. Personally, I would rather, you know, if I was working and I had some disposable income and you don't need to see a doctor that often, I'd rather pay the gap and see like a good doctor for 15 minutes who's not completely fried from seeing 12 patients an hour, and yeah, like get that quality. In Scotland, the prescriptions are free. That's fantastic. That's a really good thing. Going back to the groceries, while the groceries over there are really cheap relative to Australia's extortionate duopoly anyway, they taste like shit. Like the food quality there is just awful. I remember the first time my friend gave me a tomato that he'd grown out of his garden, and I was like, wow, this tastes amazing. And that's what Australian produce tastes like in comparison to produce in the UK. Like the food there is just awful. When you fly over to Spain or whatever, you know, for a week or two that you might get away from the place, the food quality is really great. But yeah, in the UK, everything just tastes so grey and so bland. Just like all the buildings around you, there's no colour in the cities, there's no colour in the streets. It's something that did my head in. Around the central areas of all these cities, like Manchester, Glasgow, whatever, there's not any trees. So it's all just like brown, grey, beige buildings, and there's no trees or greenery anywhere. It's like this place is constantly fucking raining and there's no trees. Like the gym that I used to train at, when I would walk there from Cowcaddon's station, if anyone knows the city, I'd go to the Grip House from Cowcaddon station, and there were literally like metal trees along the way. And it's like, why would you not just plant some real trees? Like, it's so much less work and such a higher return. It was such a dystopian thing to see. I'd rather there not be metal trees than have them at all, you know? But yeah, they just didn't make use of their public space like that at all. Another thing is driving. Cars are quite cheap over there, second-hand cars. But petrol, if petrol is like $2 a litre in Australia, it's £2 a litre in the UK. The price is identical, but the symbol at the front changes. So it's and this is the case for Europe as well. It's just very expensive there on the whole. Which wouldn't be that big a deal if you made £30 an hour, but you don't. You make 10. So that was definitely something annoying. And then also, like the insurance to drive, like my partner was a first-time driver and she had to pay like £2,000 or something like that in order for her to be able to drive the car. And it just seemed like there were fees everywhere. Like in Australia, it seems like you just $1,000 for like CTP and rego, and like you can get behind the wheel. But in the UK, like the car is quite cheap up front, but then you just get shafted with fees, like when you actually want to drive the thing, from petrol to insurance. And I think the final thing that I want to talk about is the difficulty finding a job. Now, in Australia, I've always been able to just walk down the street and find a job basically within an hour, and this was the case when I got back from the UK. Like I had no money and I needed to get a job straight away, so I got a job at a fish and chip shop like 50 meters down the road from my place. And that's always been my experience, is that if I want to get work, I can get it very easily. You know, this is just like washing dishes and stuff like that. This is work that, you know, most people can do. It's not highly specialized or anything like that. But yeah, fuck me dead, in the UK, it's just hard to come across that stuff. And I remember before I got this job in healthcare recruitment, I wanted to just get out of a kitchen because I was like, yeah, pretty sick of this now. So I got into a call center, and it was really hard to get that job. I was like, I was applying for everything on Indeed, and I actually got to the point where I just went door to door throughout the city, and I was like, hey, I saw you had a job advert, here I am, like I'm ready to start, can you see that I'm competent and willing to give it a shot? Because especially after working in recruitment, you know, like you see 100 resumes a day or whatever, like they don't mean anything to you. But if you see a person in front of you, it's a person in front of you. So I thought, oh, okay, I'll just turn up, see if I can speak to the boss or the manager or whatever, and see if they'll give me a go. And after like, I think it took me like weeks and weeks of applying online and going like door to door to get a job. I ended up getting one through an online application, but it was like the shittest, most hellhole call center in the world called Kura in Glasgow, and their rating is like less than 3 stars because it's just the worst place on earth. Just like an abusive environment. It's like, one of my co-workers summed it up perfectly. It's like the middle management there, and this is probably the case in a lot of places, is basically like, you know, it's like kids playing Call of Duty. You know, they're just like having fun with fucking with people and trolling you, and like that, I don't know, that's basically their mentality with people. Yeah. So really, really horrible environment. And again, £9.50 an hour. I remember one day the heating wasn't working in there, and it was like 13 degrees in the office. I took a photo of the thermometer, and they were like, "Zan, get out," because it was like next to a Kura logo, and they thought I was going to expose them or something. But yeah, just a really weird environment. Like, it's just so bizarre to see people treat each other that way as adults. You know, it's like high school sort of shit. So yeah, anyway, that's a bit of a rant about my experience living in the UK from Australia. A lot of it is economic, to be fair. Like, there are other ones, you know, in terms of like the quality of produce, and also another big thing is like there's just no, people don't snack on healthy food. Like, there's no sushi and salads. It's all like crisps and Tesco meal deals and people eating chocolate at the desk and stuff. And you know, that's just more of like a societal thing. I think Australia is a lot more health focused generally, and they value their health a lot. I remember people in Glasgow were just eating shit food all the time. And I just started eating, like I just started drinking iron brews and eating steak pies, because that's just what's around and that's what everyone's doing. So you just partake. But yeah, like I'd make like a salad and take it into work. And the people I worked with were like, "What the fuck are you eating?" It was just so alien to them. Don't get me started on when I walked into this like local canteen place with a kale smoothie that I'd made at home with a NutriBullet. And I do appreciate that kale smoothies are very pretentious and in your face, but like, wow, what a reaction I got out of these people. Yeah, and for those of you who are interested, I was living in Govan Hill, which is not like a particularly trendy area. It's relatively central, but it's a bit shit. So I'd kind of say it's maybe the equivalent to like Footscray, where it's like kind of central, but like, I don't know, it's not the best. So yeah, and I was paying quite a lot of money to live there. It's even more expensive now. It's like maybe £700 every now and then. Like, I will look at what's happening in the area to see like if it's getting any better, and it's gotten a lot worse. So yeah, I really hope that they can manage to sort something out, because the UK is supposed to be like the pinnacle of, like, people would chop their hands off to live there. You know, like, this is supposed to be one of the best places in the world to live, and it's just getting so hard there to have any opportunity, and the quality of life there is just so much lower than I could ever have imagined. And when I came back to Melbourne, I just felt like I was in utopia. I could just get a job straight away, even working at a fish and chip shop washing dishes. I had money. The public transport for central Melbourne anyway, like, is fantastic in comparison. Like, the trams and the $10 cap, and like, it just felt so good to come back. And I was waiting there because my partner was working in the NHS, and she had to finish some training before she could leave. So that's sort of why we were waiting it out together there. Otherwise, I would have left a year earlier. But yeah, I mean, for those of you who think it's getting hard in Australia, and it certainly is, but I just encourage you to have a look at some like rental listings in equivalent cities around the world, and then job listings in equivalent cities around the world. Like, look at, you know, like Canada, like Vancouver or London or something like that. And I don't mean for that to be a cop-out, like, oh, they're shitter, so we shouldn't complain. Like, living standards should get better, not worse. But my God, it's so much worse elsewhere. So anyway, this is something I've ranted about a lot to my friends and my family. And I saw a video today on YouTube where someone was talking about their experience as an Australian in the UK, and they didn't say anything about this sort of stuff, and I don't hear people talking about this stuff a lot, so I thought I'd just chuck my 2 cents in. So yeah, I hope you got something out of it.